All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. This is another Bacon Bits webinar. And today we are here to talk about the thrilling topic of complex compliance requirements of the labor laws and regulations that affect the construction industry, with an emphasis on some vital topics for construction payroll managers and owners. Obviously, my name is Matt Kersey with eBacon. This is presented by eBacon, where we don't build the roads, bridges, and structures that make this country great, but we rather empower you to. I have two industry experts here with me today, presenter Jason Knight and Andrea Porter. Say hi, guys.
Good morning.
Awesome. We've slotted this for 30 minutes to be respectful of everybody's time. And at the end, if there are any questions, please put it in the chat. We'll be very happy to go back and go over those questions at the end of the webinar. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about classification issues, W-2 employees versus 1099 contractors, exempt versus non-exempt employees, deductions from pay, travel time pay, wage and hour rules. That includes overtime, meetings and trainings, on-call duty, off-the-clock work, rest breaks, and meal periods, and lastly, paid sick leave. Now, since I am not the industry expert, I'm just your host, I'm going to hand it off to Jason Knight to get things started for us today.
Well, I want to first say that Andrea is the true expert. I'm here mostly as an attempt at comic relief, but because we are both trying to share a little bit of screen time here, we arm wrestled for this, and she gets the lion's share of the presentation, but I get to start, so that's exciting. All right, let's get going. So we're beginning with misclassification or classification of employees. We're talking about W-2 versus 1099 right now. And simply paying a worker by 1099 does not make them an independent contractor. This is all set up by the government. They have rules, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and we just have to follow the rules. So the common mistake that employers make is one of two. It's either you think you're going to save a lot of time and money on taxes and not have to deal with the employee stuff, or the employee themselves request to be paid as a 1099 for kind of the same reason. They think it's just going to save them some taxes. That's not true. The rule of thumb is if they're doing the same work alongside your employees, then they are W-2s. In other words, if they walk, look, and quack like a duck, they're a duck. So. Matt.
Sorry, guys, risks of misclassification. Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
Okay. So why does this matter? And really, it's we're talking about just a bunch of different ways that different agencies wind up getting cut out of this, and everybody wants their piece. Even workers' compensation carriers want their piece. And, benefits insurance wants their piece, and you don't want to exclude an employee from benefits if they should therefore be eligible for benefits. And of course, the employment taxes and I-9 violations, all this stuff. There's just so many different ways that you can trip yourself up as a company and put yourself in the kind of the crosshairs of various agencies.
What can you tell us about employee classification rules, Jason?
Well, there are basically 11 factors for the IRS, and they're in three real areas. And one is behavioral, one is financial control, and then one is the type of relationship of the parties. Now, the DOL has a remarkably similar type of rule set, but they have their own rules, and they too talk about control, opportunity for profit and loss, length of relationship, investment of the independent contractor, those sorts of things. But they are very similar between the two different agencies, and those are the two that really kind of govern all of this stuff, whether they qualify or not as an independent contractor.
Awesome, thanks. How about penalties for misclassification? I know this is a big one. Can you shed some light on that for us, please?
Yeah, so there's a few different here, and I'm gonna just share an actual story. So I had a client a number of years ago. He had like 8 employees, and one of his employees, and it was all working fine. He'd been into operating as 1099 for years and years and years. Everything was fine up until one of his employees that he had to let go was upset about it, and then that employee called the state. The state then called him, and in a brief 2 or 3 minute phone call, he mistakenly called his 1099 people employees, and the agent quickly said, "Thank you, that's all I needed," hung up the phone, and a little over a week later, he got a bill for over $82,000, and that was just the state. So this can quickly turn into tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and penalties and back pay, et cetera, and including jail time. It actually can be classified and result in jail time. So
Well, that's the last thing we want for anybody is jail time.
yeah.
How about exempt versus non-exempt employees, Jason?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and start talking here and give Jason a little bit of a break. And I did just want to add on another kind of common mistake we see on the W-2 versus 1099 is your part-time and temporary workers. A lot of times we hear owners that say, well, no, they're only going to be working here a little bit, so we're just going to pay them 1099, or we're going to hire this person, we're going to have them work, but we're going to do it for a couple of months, pay them 1099, see if it works out, and then we'll bring them on as a W-2 employee. Again, if they're working beside your employees doing the same thing, they're most likely a W-2 employee and would be misclassified if you're paying them on a 1099 basis. All right, so now that we know who we're talking about when we're talking about employees, the next classification issue is your exempt versus non-exempt employees. So the basic point to start with is that the Department of Labor is always going to assume that an employee is not exempt from overtime rules. So the employer has to prove that the employee qualifies for the exemption. So non-exempt employees, we're talking about those that don't meet any of the exemption tests, and they are going to be covered by wage and hour laws regarding your overtime pay, minimum wage, and hours worked. And that's going to be a lot of what we talk about in the rest of this, the half hour here. So your exempt employees do have to qualify for the test. So they're exempt from overtime and kind of some of those other wage and hour issues if they meet various wage and duties tests. So the 5 most common that we hear about, you probably often are familiar with hearing the white collar exemptions. So those are your executive or management, administrative and professional exemptions. Those exemptions, the employee has to be paid on a salary basis. They have to meet that salary threshold, which we know just increased here at the federal level. They also have to meet the duties test. So it depends on what they do, what they are actually spending their time working. And then the other common ones we see for our outside sales. For that one, there is also a duties test, but there is no salary threshold that has to be met for an outside sales position. And then there is also a computer exemption. That one also, that person doesn't have to be paid on a salary. They can be paid hourly, but there is a minimum threshold that must be met. As much as I often dislike the Department of Labor, they do put out really good fact sheets that are nice and easy to read. They explain what they mean by these words and they give examples. And for this one, for your exemptions, the DOL fact sheet 17A, if you look that up, it goes through examples, and then each one of these exemptions goes into further detail. So common employer mistake we hear all the time is, oh, well, I just pay everybody on salary, so I don't have to worry about overtime. And that's not the case. So you really need to look at those duties tests and make sure that employees are, what they're doing meets those requirements.
Awesome. Andrea, for an industry standard, is this something you see as an issue across the board, or how often does this come up for people where they make these mistakes?
It comes up a lot. I would say in the construction industry, it's really common for like, oh, I just pay I pay all my field people. They get their overtime. I'm paying that. Oh, but my office people, I just pay them a salary. It's easier. They just, they get their stuff done. So it comes up a lot. I know, and this isn't just big companies that have this issue. I know a company had 11 employees. They were a flooring company, paid all his guys overtime, all of this. Everything you need to do for their installers. But the office person, the person was like, this is right-hand man, she did everything for him. Just, all the administrative stuff was great, no issues, paid her on salary. When she left employment, she made a complaint to the Department of Labor. She had been keeping track of her time worked by screenshotting her time on the computer every day for 1.5 years, and then went to the Department of Labor and made a complaint that she should have received overtime based on the type of work she was doing. I don't off the top of my head remember what their fine was, but I think it was in back wages, because then they also looked at the other office people who had also been paid. So like 3 people went back, looked 3 years, what they needed to be paid, and had like a $20,000 bill that had to be paid in the next week. So yeah, it's very common. And it can just take an employee complaint. It can take maybe a union complaint, making a complaint about a non-union contractor. So very common.
Okay, thanks. That sheds some light on the importance of having all of your, I won't say ducks in a row, I'll say pigs in a row since we're eBacon, but shed some light on that.
Line up for
Andrea, how about,
Relief.
go ahead, Jason.
I said, you're the comic relief. That's.
Oh, I'm trying to be. Who wants to take over deductions, Andrea or Jason?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about it in 2 ways. So I was talking about it with your exempt employees and then also non-exempt. So for your exempt employees, basically they need to always get their full weekly salary, regardless of what the DOL calls quality or quantity of work. So no matter how much they're doing or how much they're working, how good it is, they need to get that full weekly salary. Some prohibited deductions that we often get asked about are partial day absences. So if they work a half day, they need to get paid for that full week. Same thing if they're off for jury duty or maybe a day for military leave. Again, so you're always looking at the work week, how much, or if they're working or during a company closure. So if it's slow or maybe you're going to be closed for a couple days, that salaried employee, the exempt salaried employee, they need to get their full weekly salary for that week. So for non-exempt employees, you have a lot more latitude to make deductions, but you want to make sure that those are authorized in writing. So you can't do it unless you have that written authorization, and you also can't take the deduction if they end up earning less than minimum wage. So if you have a minimum wage earner, you're not going to be able to take a deduction from their pay for something like equipment or uniforms. Now this is what the DOL calls what's for the benefit of the employer versus the benefit of the employee. So there's a little note there. So something like a loan or benefits repayments, that's for the benefit of the employee. You can take them down to 0. But if it's something like non-returned uniforms, something like that, you need to make sure that when you take that deduction, they're still left with at least minimum wage for the applicable work week. Some common employer mistakes that we see is deducting from an exempt salaried employee for a company holiday during the waiting period. So if your company policy is, hey, new hires don't get holiday pay for the first 90 days, you need to make sure that your exempt salary employees are still getting that holiday. Another thing we get asked all the time, I just got that asked yesterday, is, hey, we have this guy leaving, he hasn't returned his uniforms yet, can we hold his final check until he gives us that back? And the answer is no. Again, if you have it authorized in writing and it's an hourly employee, you can take a deduction, take that down to minimum wage, but he does need to get his paycheck when he's due to get it. And also, I should have put this caveat way at the beginning, always check your state laws. So especially with deductions, there's a lot of states that have their own rules. So like in California, you can't deduct for any of this anyway. So we all know, like, the employee's just going to get their money.
Awesome. What can you guys tell me about travel time pay?
All right, so this is something that's we get lots of questions on, and it can definitely be confusing. So I will try to make it as clear as possible. So it always depends on the type of travel involved. So generally speaking, your home to work and back, that's your commute, is not considered time that has to be paid. However, if that commute time is something that's under the control of the employer, such as they have to use a particular type of transportation, you do have to pay for that. So an example would be you have a mine in Utah, employees are supposed to drive to a particular site with their car and then get on the employer provided transportation from the parking lot, take the shuttle from there to the rest of the way in. The drive to the parking lot would be commute time, would not have to be paid. Then that shuttle time from the parking lot to the mine, that would be time that would have to be paid because they're required to use that type of transportation. A question we get a lot is, well, what about, I have guys that work all over the city and they're in different job sites. Like, what's commute time? What do I have to pay for that? And generally speaking, it's still not going to be considered time that has to be paid. It's still going to be commute time, as long as it's within the company's usual business area. And a company can determine that by 3 different ways. And you're either going to say, okay, this is our geographic area. So we're in Phoenix. I could, as an employer, I could say Metro Phoenix is my geographic area, or I could say our usual business area is within 50 miles of our headquarters. Or I could say, hey, it's how long it takes, which is 1 hour. Now, if you're in Los Angeles, I wouldn't recommend that because, you know, 1 hour doesn't really get you anywhere. But here in Phoenix, if someone's doing a job within the Phoenix metro area, it's all going to be considered commute. But if I send them down to Tucson for a job, anything outside the Phoenix metro area, that's going to be time I have to pay them for that travel. And then this last point here is kind of goes back to the employer provided transportation. Anytime that the time is under the control of the employer, is the phrasing they use, that's time that may have to be paid. And an example is, let's say the employee has to do a bunch of work at home. They have reports, they have to contact clients, and they spend 30 to 45 minutes working at home, and then they drive into the office. If they have to do that, that drive in between is going to be time that has to be paid. And we'll actually see that on the next slide here. The Department of Labor breaks down 3 different types of travel time pay and how they must be paid. So after, like, once we know what's commuting time and then what's work, it's going to say pretty much everything else is work time. So the first one is travel that's all in a day's work. So that last example I gave, someone's doing reports, contacting clients, doing some things, then they drive in. That's kind of be considered the same here as you're going from job site to job site, and that travel time in between. So if you have employees that are working at, maybe if they show up and they have to do some work at the yard, load tools, drive to the job site, that travel time is going to be paid. The next example or section of travel time is a special 1-day assignment in another city. So it's kind of like that example I gave. We normally work in Phoenix. We send someone to Tucson. They're going to drive to Tucson and drive back. That travel time must be paid, except that we can deduct out what that normal commute time would usually be. And then overnight travel, it's the Department of Labor looks at it as you have to pay them for the travel time that's the same as whatever cuts across their normal workday. So easiest way is an example. Person's normal workday is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. On Saturday, they travel from noon to 7. The Department of Labor says you actually only have to pay them for the time that cuts across their usual workday. So that noon to 5 p.m., because that's when their day would normally end. Now, I find most employers do pay them for the whole time that they are spent traveling. They're not going to not pay them. They wouldn't be doing that or traveling if it weren't for you. Having that. So, and then once they're there and they've traveled and they get to the hotel or the Airbnb, wherever they're staying, then you're kind of like, okay, you go back to the same thought process as you were for just normal day, right? You're not having to pay them for time at the hotel, having meals, sleeping, anything like that. When they drive to the job site the next day, that's still commute time. You're really looking at just that time during the day when they're working. And then when they travel back home, you're again looking at that travel time that cuts across the normal workday. And again, much like everything else, this is federal law, especially in California, there are different rules for travel. I'm sure that's clear.
Before we continue, I'm sorry, I want to throw out one thing. We do have a couple of questions coming in. We will answer questions at the end, but also as a notice to those that haven't maybe seen it, there is a section where you can enter questions if you haven't seen it before, but there's a section where you can enter questions and we will cover those. So.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
All right, so travel time rate, basically, yes, you can pay a lower rate when they're traveling versus actually performing the work. So, obviously you don't want to pay an underwater welder the same amount of money that they're doing when they're performing work as when they're traveling. But there's just a couple rules for that. You do have to let them know ahead of time in writing, and then you still need to make sure they're getting at least minimum wage. So as long as everyone's on the same page that, hey, this is how much you're going to be paid when you're traveling, and they're not actually performing work. So maybe you have guys go in a car together and someone's sitting on their laptop and they're working and getting things done. They're doing their job. They would need to get their regular pay. But you can pay at a lower rate. Just want to make sure you do it the right way.
Awesome. How about overtime rules?
All right, so overtime, everybody's favorite thing, certainly employees' favorite thing. From a federal standpoint, everybody, I believe, is probably familiar. It's 1.5 times the employee's regular rate of pay after 40 hours in a work week, right? So you have to pay attention. I'll talk about it later, but obviously various states have different rules, and so you have to pay attention to the state rules when applicable. But if you have 2 or more rates during the work week, then you have to use their quote unquote regular rate of pay. And that's a total compensation of everything for the week, including their base pay, whether it's salary or hourly wage, the total overtime pay, non-discretionary, bonuses, commissions, anything that is going to be included into their income for that period. And then you have to use all of that in order to calculate their actual rate. Overtime pay is calculated on time worked. So that's a nice thing for folks when you've got somebody that worked has 45 hours in a week, but really had 8 hours of PTO. You don't have to pay overtime because the 8 hours of PTO is not worked time, and it's only on work time. And as I said, states differ in a variety of ways, so you got to always pay attention to the state to see which one has the higher standard. But the common mistakes are not paying for unauthorized time, overtime. That's a big one. If they work the time, then you have to pay them for the time, right? You can discipline them, you can have conversations with them and address the issue, but you can't not pay them. Also, not including all pay in the regular rate of pay, just looking at their salary and saying, or their regular hourly rate, and multiplying 1.5 times that, but ignoring their commissions or their bonuses that they received during that period as well. And then the last mistake or common mistake that we see is allowing employees to make up missed time from one week and the next week. And then, of course, not paying any resulting overtime due. So if somebody said, hey, I'll make up the 8 hours next week, and that results in a 48-hour week, well, now they have 8 hours of overtime. So pay attention to that. Make up time could push them into an overtime scenario.
All right, thanks, Jason. Which of you would like to tackle meetings and trainings?
Yeah, I'll take that one, and I'll kind of go through these last wage and hour issues quick. I know we're coming up to the end of the time, and I want to make sure we have time to answer questions, and these slides will be made available to attendees afterwards. So we'll go these pretty quickly. Meetings and trainings, this is paid time. Every once in a while we get questions about if they have to pay them or not. There are times when they don't have to be paid, but as you'll see there on the bullet points, like when is this actually ever going to happen? Why would you, it's outside normal hours, it's voluntary, it's not job related, and they're not doing any work. Like, of course, it's not even related to your job. So common mistake, training time or orientations prior to their first day of employment. They're there because you're employing them. They're going to do a job for you. That's paid time. Another one is pre-shift safety meetings. They're like, well, it's before their shift started. You're requiring them to be there. It's paid time.
Awesome. Thanks for the clarity on that. How about on-call duty?
Yeah, this one I think is the easiest to kind of go over in an example. So if you have a firefighter who's at the station, he is paid for his whole day, his or her whole day, because they're required to be there. They can sleep, they can work out, but if that call comes, they're at that second, they have to go, and they're on call, but they are what they refer to as they're working there, right? They can't do anything else. They don't really have a lot of freedom to do what they want.
Can't leave or anything like that. So
alternatively would be like a tech who's on call at home over the weekend. If something comes up and they need to go out on a call, but they've got maybe 2 hours to respond. They can go to dinner, they can sit, watch a movie, they just need to be available. That person is what they call waiting to be engaged. So it's more of a waiting. So you don't have to pay for that waiting time, you just have to pay for the working time. All right, in the next section, oops, sorry, I cut you off there. I'm just trying to make sure we get through them quickly. Rest breaks and meal periods. So at the federal level, there are no rest breaks or meal periods. This is really where you need to look to your state laws. The important thing here is that if you do give them rest breaks, or if your state requires them, those rest breaks are paid time. So actual meal periods that are 30 minutes or more can be unpaid, but rest breaks are paid time. So and I've talked to the Department of Labor about this. If your policy is a 10-minute rest break and they take 20, the Department of Labor says, no, you need to pay them. And it says right in their fact sheets, usually 5 to 20 minutes, that is paid working time. So they're not clocking in and out, they're just being paid for that. The meal periods are different. So one thing that we do see a lot on meal periods is employers that want to take an automatic deduction for a meal break versus having somebody actually clock in and out. And while that can be done, we really don't recommend it, is because you don't have any record that the employee actually took that time. And there's certain states, that have meal period requirements. And so you want proof that, hey, this person took that time. So when they're punching out for lunch and punching back in afterward, you've got that record, that time record that shows what they actually did.
Awesome. And off the clock work.
Yeah, we just want to touch on this one because it's something that does come up a lot. You're like, well, we don't allow our employees to work off the clock. Well, if they do, you still need to pay them. So make sure that even if it's unauthorized, like overtime, you still want to pay them. And I can't tell you how many times I hear employment law attorneys. So usually I'm on the other side. I'm listening to a webinar and I listen to a lot. They all recommend electronic timekeeping systems for punching in and out. You don't have any better record that employee, that's what they're working, because they're punching in and out and doing that. So you really want to restrict employees from working off the clock. You want to have clearer written policies. You want to train your supervisors and train your employees so everyone knows what's happening. You also want to go back and follow up. And I'm an HR person, but I'm the first one to say, like, written policies don't mean anything if it's not what's actually happening out in the field or in the yard or in the office. Make sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and then check up and say, hey, is this actually what's going on? And then that should be matching up. And it can be a little bit of babysitting in the beginning, but in the end, it does pay off when you've got your accurate time records and people are taking their breaks according to your policies. On this note, donning and doffing is a term that you might hear. Matt, if you can flip up the next section there, it's just a fancy term for saying they're putting on and taking off their uniforms. That's paid time. So common employer mistakes, just not paying for this time, just thinking like, oh, well, our shift is 8 to 5 and we just pay them 8 to 5. That's what the supervisor wrote. You really want to make sure that employees are clocking in and out the time they're actually working and that you're paying for that time. And a big question we get a lot is, well, they haven't submitted their time card this week, so we don't have to pay them, right? We'll just, or we have a written policy that says you don't get paid unless you submit your time card. That is not going to fly with the Department of Labor. Their stance is that it's the employer's responsibility to know what their employee is working. And if you're like, hey, he was off doing a job in Colorado, how do I even know? They don't care. So it's really up to the employer to figure out how to get that time tracked and recorded and get them paid. Even if you have to make an estimation of what they worked, get them paid, and then make up after that, after the fact.
Awesome. And paid sick leave, Andrea.
I'm going to turn this over to Jason and we'll get this wrapped up.
All right.
Yep. So for paid sick leave, it's just important to understand or know that there's almost 20 states and several counties and city jurisdictions that have put in a required paid sick leave law, and that's expanding all the time. Usually, most laws kind of start with 1 or 2 places, California being very common, and then others start to follow suit, and that's what we're seeing with paid sick leave on a state level. And then if you're a federal contractor and you're performing work on Davis-Bacon Act-related contracts, then the executive order that you see there, 13706, requires paid sick leave as well.
All right, Jason, if you would give us a quick recap and takeaways from today.
Sure. So what you should take away from this is this is very complex. There's a lot of detail here, and do not depend on AI. I know it's all the rage, but don't depend on AI or even a Google search to help provide the correct information. It could be outdated. You could find something from last year and it's just been changed. It's just not worth it. Understanding that state and federal employment regs are critical to your business is huge, but definitely pay attention to those states too. Companies have been fined large sums. We said earlier, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and sometimes it even results in jail time. So don't play with this. And probably the best takeaway from all is your business depends on getting HR guidance and recommendations from regarding federal and state laws. But find somebody that you trust. Find a labor attorney, find a company like eBacon, somebody that you can trust and get that support from, because it's really vital.
Awesome. Jason, you said there were a few questions in. Did you have those in front of you? I have a few in front of me as well.
Yeah, I do actually.
Okay,
so our first question, and I apologize, I know we've hit our 30 minutes. If anybody needs to take off, we respect that, we understand, we appreciate you being here. If you have a few minutes, we'll go through these questions here quickly. So the first one is, what type of office employees have to report or not? Superintendents on a construction site versus project managers and support staff in the corporate office? Question. That's the question.
The question is, do they have to report?
Yeah, what type of office employees have to report or not?
I'm going to take a guess that they're asking about if they have to report their hours. Do you think, Jason, that's a...
That seems reasonable. Yeah, that seems reasonable, and to that point, so let's assume it's about reporting hours. And I know this is Tavar. Tavar, if that's not the question, we can definitely connect with you after the fact.
Yeah, so that's going to go back to that classification of exempt versus non-exempt. So if they really need to classify under one of the exemptions, so the executive, which again is really management, but if they manage 2 or more full-time employees, then they're going to be exempt from those overtime requirements, and they're not required to record their hours. I'll give you an example from the office and try to make things simple. It's when we get in the middle that it gets really gray, but in your office, a controller typically is going to be at an exempt level under the professional exemption. However, your accounts receivable clerk is not going to be. And it has to do with the level of independence and exercise of judgment that they're using. Are they just following a set of rules, or are they kind of thinking through things critically on their own? So there, and again, that goes back to the fact sheets, and I mean, I can do an entire full day webinar just on this topic. So, but again, those fact sheets, if you just, in this case, you can Google, because I'm going to tell you what to Google, just DOL fact sheet exemptions, and you should be able to come up. And again, it has it's 17A is the general one that kind of talks about it, and then there will also be links to each one of it, and it'll say, here's for the executive, this is what's required, and here's some examples. So that's really your best resource to kind of evaluate if employees are exempt or not. And again, if they're exempt, you don't have to record their hours, because they're not subject to their overtime rules. Now, you can record their hours, you can make them, whether it's for job costing purposes or attendance, but you just can't use that information for pay purposes. You can't deduct from their pay just because, you know, they missed 4 hours one day, but you can have them clock in. We do get that question too.
Awesome. Jason, I have one more question that came in. I think it refers to the donning and doffing slide, if I may.
I actually have several here, but
okay,
go for it.
This one just says, do I need to pay for employees while they are changing in and out of their uniforms? And I would reference that donning and doffing slide, so I'll let you guys answer that.
Yeah, and that's a yes. I mean, they're doing it because they have to, right? So if the requirement is maybe you have a clean room and you come in and they have to get there and put all their clean room stuff on before they go in, that time is going to be work time. You can't say, oh, well, your shift begins once you get in the clean room.
All right, Jason?
All right, so want to make sure I heard you correctly. You have to pay holiday pay regardless of a probationary period.
For your exempt salaried employees, correct.
For your exempt salaried employees. Okay, perfect. We give our employees, the next question, we give our employees the option to meet at the yard and carpool on one of the company trucks. Do we only pay the driver or all of the guys?
If it's voluntary, you don't have to pay the passengers. To the driver, it depends. So let's say, it depends if he's required to. And that's really what it comes down to. Just being in the company truck doesn't mean you have to pay him, but if he's required to be there to take maybe the materials plus whoever wants to jump on, then yes, you do need to pay him.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Yes, the slides will be available. We'll send those out to everybody afterwards. I apologize. Is there a more in-depth webinar? So we'll talk about that in a second. Let's see, most of our work is prevailing wage. Travel time does not have to be paid at that rate. I think they're kind of asking, is that correct?
Yeah, and that's going to be really specific into prevailing wage in the situation. So I'm going to have to pass that off. Whoever asked that question, if you want to reach out to us, I'm happy to answer. We could get into that in more detail. It's also going to depend on the state.
Yeah, Ernesto, we definitely can touch base with you on that. So let's see here. Will a copy? Yes, copy will be made available. Yeah, retrieve some of the slides. Yes. Oh, and then Tavar chimed back in. He was talking about for prevailing wage, the question at that very first question that you were answering. What types of office employees have to report? He's talking about regarding prevailing wage. So we can circle back on that one. And then I just got one last question here. Is there a good way to track breaks other than having them clock in into paid break time? It creates a lot of additional clock in and outs, and most guys get confused. We were previously sued, and we were not able to prove that the guys took breaks. So.
Yeah, so this is, again, I listen to a lot of employment law attorneys, and they don't recommend clocking in and out for break times. It's paid time. You're actually not tracking it. This is something that's done. It's by your policies and your training and following up. So, and I know everyone's busy and you got work to do, but if it's like, hey, this is what our policy is. And so, and again, you're not required to provide them, but I'm going to assume that this question is coming from California. Is that, so there you're required to provide a 10-minute break for each major fraction of 4 hours worked. That it's just part of the culture of what you're doing. The supervisors are telling them to do them. You can have them certify and say, hey, yes, I got all my rest breaks and meal periods as outlined in my company's policy. I'll be honest, if it's something that they just have to check a box every day, it becomes routine, and later you're audited or you do have a lawsuit, something like that, and they're asking questions and they say, oh, well, it says here you got all your rest breaks, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I just check the box every day because I want to clock out because I want to go home, but no, our supervisors don't let us take breaks. That checking the box isn't going to help you. So it's really about what's actually happening. And if people get asked those questions, do you get your breaks? It's like, yeah, oh yeah, we get our breaks, we do this. And again, and I know people don't like to hear that because it's not like, oh, hard and fast proof. But some of those things that I've seen people put in place, like, oh, well, they said they did it. Again, if it's not what's actually happened, it's not going to help you. So I don't know if that's going to answer the question or be what they want to hear, but that's our advice.
I think the first part that you were talking about is the best piece, which is break time really shouldn't be clocked in and out. It's just a break. Let them take their break, their 5 minutes, and let them, they don't need to worry about clocking in and out because it's a break, it's paid anyway. And so I think that's the piece that's the most important takeaway.
Yeah. And we also get clients that ask about, well, they're taking too long of breaks. They're taking too many breaks. I was talking to the DOL agent and I'm like, this client, this person, they're taking 25-minute breaks. Do they have to pay them when they're not? They're like, it's not 30 minutes. You can't deduct it as a meal break. If it's just a break, it's not a meal period. If it's just a rest break, they need to pay them. And the DOL agent said, well, why didn't they fire them? So they have no problem with you disciplining or firing the person if they're not following your policies and your procedures, but they want you to pay them.
Yeah, follow the rules, otherwise there's ramifications, but we got to pay you regardless. So, okay, very good. That's all of our questions here, so thank you for that. For us, Matt said at the beginning, we're eBacon. Some of you folks know who we are, and we appreciate you taking your time with us. Others may not. We work with not only all of this kind of fun stuff and all the HR aspects of things, but time tracking, payroll, a variety of employee management aspects, just a whole bunch of stuff that employers can utilize us for to work with their employees to make their lives easier, more efficient, reduce costs, etc. So we'd love to spend 15 minutes with you, 10, 15 minutes with you at some point. We'll reach out, we will send you the slides, and we'd love to spend some time talking with you, see if there's an opportunity for us to help you in any way. And then we do have our next webinar in series is August 8th. It is specifically prevailing wage, but California DIR prevailing wage 101. And we're going to cover a bunch of aspects of how do you register before, what are the various codes on the determination mean, how do you read determinations, all that kind of fun stuff. So we'd love to have you attend that one. And then there's a bunch of clients that are on the call. I know that we actually are having another webinar July 26th, I believe it is, which you'll get an email here shortly, but it's about the releases, the updated functionality and product releases of our platform for Q1 and Q2 of this year. So pay attention to that. We'd love to have you attend that and kind of understand everything that we've done over the last 6 months.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason and Andrea, for shedding some light on some of those important topics. And thank you to all of our listeners for coming to another Bacon Bits webinar. I know there were a lot of questions Jason and Andrea just answered about, are the slides available? eBacon does have a YouTube channel, and this continues to grow. We appreciate all the attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.